Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanao Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahe Tejasvinavaditamastu Mavit Vishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Invoking the grace of our Master, Samasta Jana Kalyane Niratam Karunamayam Namami Chinmayam Devam Sadgurum Brahma Vidvaram Sadgurum Brahma Vidvaram. Om Koti Koti Pranam Swamiji, and to everybody. I'm sure everybody would know about Swamiji, but there is a little bit of introduction that I want to do. And most of us know he's the head of Chinmaya Mission Mumbai. He has been a dynamic part of the Chinmaya Mission. He inspires the youth, and he has been conducting the YEP. He has also been mentoring corporates like Mahindra, Reliance, Tata Motors and Toyota. But there is something about Swamiji that I would like to say. These are all things that everybody can find out on Google. But there's something that I really feel when we are going to be listening to Swamiji today, we really need to know how inspired we have been with a master like him. He's actually so flexible and he's so available for every age group. The children love him. The teenagers are feeling inspired every time with him. The adults connect to him. And Swamiji, I want to really tell you something today. I was doing a class last week and I told my students, for the clarity, invoke a living guru and imagine who it is. And most of them actually said it's Swami Swadmananji. So you are a master to so many.
Guru is our master. We all are seekers.
Of course, Swamiji, the Guru Parampara. But I had to tell you this, that how the students look at you. Another very important thing about Swamiji is, for me, I look at him, he's the epitome of humility. I've done a yatra with him. When I was in Bombay, I was very fortunate to have things with him. He'll practically do everything and he'll make you feel you're the doer. So he is so humble and it is so inspiring to have someone like him as a mentor, as a guide. And truly, Swamiji, the whole session can go on introducing you. But I really want to come back now and really thank you for sparing your precious time for this session. With your permission, I'll introduce Devesh and then I'll let him start the session.
Yes.
Okay. So, Devesh Tilokani, he is in one of the best unis in Canada, Richard Ivey. He's a motivational speaker, he's a blogger, and he's currently hosting Progresso Hauling podcasts. Now, these podcasts are very, very inspiring. Devesh is, if you ask me personally, he's the ideal son any parent could have. And I would really like the viewers to know about this. Devesh, when he was in college, when normally children are so worried about their marks and about everything external, this boy used to train children for Gita chanting. And everybody who participated in Gita chanting actually came in outstanding results. So he has trained so many. He's gone through his ups and downs, but he's taken Vedant as his path, and he has been sharing his knowledge of scriptures by modern techniques. He's snapping few-second videos every day. Everything is related to our scriptures, and he's snapping it on his Snapchat and Twitter and really, really inspiring the youth. So Devesh, thank you so much. And now I'll ask you to introduce Sunita ji, and we'll begin the session.
Thank you so much, Chitraji, for the really kind words. Really, really appreciate it. So next I'll be introducing Dr. Sunita Shankar. Now, Dr. Sunita Ji is a PhD in clinical psychology with over 20 plus years of experience working with people who have mental health problems. She has worked in the psychiatry departments of organizations such as Somaiya Hospital in Mumbai, National University Hospital in Singapore, as well as the Indian Navy. She currently has her private practice and is a visiting faculty of psychogeriatric unit of Nair Hospital, where she does neurocognitive assessments to diagnose dementia and other neurocognitive deficits. She has been associated with Chinmaya Mission since childhood and is currently the president of Chinmaya Mahima Zone in central Mumbai. She knows that if there is anything good in her life today, she owes it to her guru, Swami Chinmaya Nanda, which I think we all owe over here for sure. So that is Dr. Sunita Shankar. And next we have our other co-host, Chitra Ahuja. Now, Chitra ji and me go way, way, way back. She's been like a second mother to me. So it really is my pleasure to welcome her and, be a other pleasure to introduce her. So Chitra ji is a teacher of Vedanta from Chinmaya Mission, Australia. She currently resides in Brisbane, Australia, but her passion for Vedanta means that she has helped people from all over the world. Life has thrown a lot at her, but it is her belief in Vedanta that has kept her going. She is someone that goes the extra mile with everyone that she helps and is a true sevak and mentor in every aspect. She is an inspiration to me and to so many around her. So thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time out to tune in. We'll get started with Swamiji and Sunita ji answering questions. So we'll get started right now. So the first question is that why are external accomplishments at an all-time high, as we've seen in the world, with wealth increasing around the world, but mental health problems for some reason are not going down and are also at an all-time high?
So Hari Om and salutations to all of you, and welcome to this session on mental health from the Vedantic perspective. So a very pertinent question that Devesh asked, that when we are seeing so much of affluence and comforts and conveniences increasing, we are at the same time also seeing that there are a lot of mental health issues which are increasing. So why is this happening? Gurudev used to say, when I say Gurudev, it means Swami Chinmayananda. He used to say that tragedy of modern life is decreasing happiness amidst increasing comforts. And this he said many years back, many decades back actually, 30, 40 years back he said it, but it keeps becoming truer by the day. So why this happens is, again I'm going to quote him, a very beautiful example that Gurudev used to give was that, there is a boat and the boat has a mast and this mast has a sail. So the wind carries forward the boat through the sail. So the mast is visible to us, but what is not visible to us is there is a keel which is below the boat. And that is what keeps the balance, otherwise the boat will topple. So he would say that standard of living is the mast and standard of life is the keel. The higher is the standard of living, deeper must be our standard of life. So when this balance is not there, when our mind is not anchored properly, then standard of living may increase, but we also find that the mind is not ready to handle the changes. The circumstances have changed a lot. The peer pressure has increased, competitiveness has increased, academic pressure has increased. Many ways the pressures of life have increased. Not that it was not there earlier, but today it is more, there's no doubt about it. All the more the need for anchoring in knowledge, the right understanding, and anchoring in emotions. Our emotions have to get anchored. If these two anchorings are not there, the spiritual knowledge anchoring and the emotional anchoring, then we find that the person will somewhere or the other feel the pressure of life and will find it difficult to handle it. And that's how the mental health issues keep rising. So we find the classical example of Arjun in that. Arjun is a very skilled archer. He is a very efficient archer. He is very good person also, very value-based, hard-working, successful. And yet when he is in the Mahabharat war, why did he collapse? And what did Shri Krishna do? Did he change anything outside? He empowered him with the right knowledge to anchor within. This knowledge of the mind, knowledge of the self. And he taught him certain various other aspects like detachment, acceptance, many such things. Then at the end of this war we find, at the end of the Gita we find that the same dejected, depressed and despondent Arjun has become a very dynamic person. So from Vedantic perspective, what is necessary is that we must deepen our standard of life on a daily basis. We must be in touch with spiritual knowledge as well as emotional anchoring. That is a very, very important aspect. Because otherwise, mind itself is the cause of our bondage. The Upanishads say that. Mana eva manushyanam karanam bandha mokshayoho. So mind becomes the cause of bondage and mind itself becomes the cause of liberation. We become free, we become happy when we anchor properly in knowledge and not dependent on the world outside. So the mind which is dependent will be the mind which will have many issues. So that's the spiritual perspective on this.
Thank you, Swamiji. To give you a clinical and a psychological perspective on this, one of the main reasons we do find an increase in the mental disorders, especially the minor ones like depression and anxiety, the major ones remaining the same, there isn't much significant increase in them, is the stress levels have increased. This life has become psychologically much more complex than it was before. If we look at people of the earlier generation, they led fairly simple lives. And also another reason is that because of awareness of the media and because of things available very easily, the frustration tolerance level of people in general has decreased. I remember when I was young, if I wanted to buy a dress or if I wanted to buy something, I had to wait for the shops to open and then go and buy. But now even in the middle of the night, if I want to buy something, all I have to do is click a button. So there is no sense of when, how, where. I can just get what I want if I want. And the only criterion for that is that I should be materialistically and financially successful. So as a result, money has almost become a goal rather than means. Because if I have money and a mobile in my hand, the world is my market. And at any time, I can market even in the middle of the night. Because of all of this, life has become so complex, the demands are so much that people have somewhere stopped looking inward, as Swamiji said. In earlier times, people followed mental hygienic behavior. They were taught what is emotional hygiene. They knew how to manage their emotions. Their frustration tolerance was very high. And because of that, we are classically seeing that even though the major mental illnesses are not significantly increasing that much, minor mental illnesses like depression and anxiety, we do see a significant increase in them because people are not able to tolerate the stress and the tension. Their resilience and the capacity to contain a problem, to bear a problem has become lesser. Thank you.
So Swamiji, we'll go to the next question.
Yeah, just one input I had.
Yes.
I was also doing some research on this topic. So I also found that to some extent, it is also not, I don't mean to be insensitive to anybody, but I also find that people like to be depressed and people like to say that, you know, I am sad, I am stressed, I am frustrated. You know, small children nowadays, they say. The other day I saw on Snapchat one 12-year-old boy is saying life sucks. At 12 years, why is your life going through this? What do you even know about the challenges of life that much? But I think it is in the vocabulary, in the way people behave with each other. So if somebody is not going through any of this, sometimes people feel that, I'm worthless or I'm unproductive. So I also feel that is one reason that people want to be perceived as going through some challenge. Again,
I
not
agree.
away from, yeah, Sunita can elaborate better.
I agree, because if somebody is not stressful nowadays, they're seen as people who are not doing much.
Yeah.
So, saying that I'm so stressful has almost become a fashion statement. And also, we have some young youth, teenagers who are in the creative field, who have actually told me that, when we treat them of depression, they have said that I'm not depressed anymore. I'm feeling so normal. My creativity also went away with it. So, all of that, it is this component to it, that some people perceive being depressed as a special status. And it's sad, but because there's less of mental awareness, they know how to differentiate sadness and depression. That's another thing. The word depression is very loosely used. It's a disorder. What most of us are is sad. We are not depressed.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So Swamiji, there's another question about the peer pressure, the heartbreak, the things that youth go through, exams. It becomes the reason for pushing someone to take one's life. How can such ignorance be taken care by introducing the study of Vedanta?
See, Vedanta is very clear that human life is an extremely precious opportunity. One doesn't get a human life so easily. It is said 84 lakh species one has to go through before one comes to the human birth. So nature has also invested a lot in getting us to human body. We have also gone through a lot in the evolutionary process. So when we have got this human body, there is a special capability in this human body. Why is it said it is such a rare thing? Because we have a buddhi, we have an intellect which can do subtle discrimination, which can discriminate between pleasure and pain. Even animals can do pleasure and pain, and what is good and what is not good in terms of food, and the people, their enemies and their herd members, etc. But the special discrimination in terms of what is right and wrong, what is good and pleasant, what is temporary and permanent, those things only a human being is capable of doing. And how to handle, like Sunita said, frustration tolerance has become very less. Now, there may be circumstances outside, no denial of it. There are, as we said, peer pressure is there or academic pressure is there, and all these the youth are going through. But does it mean that I just have to end my life? Gurudev used to say beautifully, what we meet is fate. How we meet is free will. Are we using our free will? Are we using our power of intellect to pause, to take a balanced decision, not to become very impulsive? Do I feel strong from inside? That inner strength has to come, because life will bring, and Gurudev used to say life is a series of challenges and problems, and these problems, they are supplied to you free of cost. You don't even have to ask them. One is not over, the other is ready already, and is a line as though. So what will I do? Will I just give up and will I just end my life? That is escapism. There is no end to problems in that way. So Vedanta says that the choice is ours as a human being, that how do we strengthen ourselves, and the study of the scriptures and anchoring in Vedanta is a very, very important aspect that can make me feel confident. People, when we have grown up, we used to see, I don't know, today I don't see TV much, so I have no idea. But when we used to grow up, there was that advertisement used to come, boost is the secret of my energy. So for body, they all say for children, take this and your child will grow with proteins and nutrition and, vitamins and minerals and all balanced growth and all that. We need to say Vedant, drink this cup of Vedant, which has 1 spoon of Upanishad and 2 spoons of this Bhagavad Gita and a little bit of lime of some japa. You sprinkle it in and then you just drink it and you will be very hatta katta. So we need to do that. Otherwise, just be giving excuses for problems. So many people face challenges. How did people become great? You see the lives of great achievers. They have fought against all the problems and challenges, overcome them, and that's how they achieve greatness. So Vedanta is very clear about that. Our responsibilities. You see, Krishna did not tell Arjun that, oh Arjun, I really sympathize with you. You know, it's a very tough condition. I think it is good. You must go away. You took a right decision. He whipped him up saying, Shudram Hridaya Daurbalyam, with your weakness of your heart, get up now. So that is what we need. We need to anchor within properly, not give excuses. That is a victim mindset, is a mindset of a weak person. The hero mindset is required. And how that will come? It will not come overnight. It has to be built. You know, gradually how we do strength training. Physically you do strength training. Same way we do mental and spiritual strength training. And there are systematic exercises to do that. And that's what has to be done.
You asked the psychological perspective of peer pressure and how does it lead to ending one's life.
Yes,
First of
Swamiji.
all, one has to understand that something like self-harm does not have one singular cause. From the way we look at it, there are multiple causes. It is what we call as a biopsychosocial model. There is a biological vulnerability, there is a psychological vulnerability, and there are social factors that enable self-harm. So we can never see one person who has harmed himself or herself and pinpoint at one cause and say it is because of peer pressure he or she did it. No, because there are so many people who go through peer pressure, not all of them harm themselves. There are some who come out of it in a very strong and resilient way. So saying that only peer pressure can cause someone to take the extreme step of taking away one's life, we cannot say that. Because there are many families which have a very dysfunctional way of bringing up their children. That could be the cause. Or there may be a biological vulnerability to certain disorders. That may be the cause. Or socially, there may be extreme circumstances. So one cannot put a peer pressure specifically as a cause for any kind of self-harm. There are multiple cases, multiple causes that can be attributed to a single case.
Thank you so much, Swamiji and Sunita ji, for elaborating on that. Swamiji, I really loved how you said victim mindset is a weak mindset. And of course, Gurudev's incredible quote, which is, what we meet is fate, how we meet it is free will. That's beautiful, and it's helped me out personally so much. And Sunita ji, really liked how you brought in the biopsycho and social model as well. So sort of the next question is that, maybe what are some of the symptoms that one should look out for when related to mental health issues, and maybe like what's like the family's role as well within this?
I'll specifically talk of depression because that is the most common amongst all the disorders that we see now. Depression, first of all, it's important that we differentiate it from sadness, because all of us go through regular sadness and we should not mistake it to be a depressive disorder. In depression, if I have to list out some of the most common symptoms, it is sad and irritable mood. Not everybody who is depressed is sad. Sometimes you will see that they become irritable, snappy, and they fight. There is a drop in self-confidence. There is a sense of helplessness. They are unable to see a bright future. And very importantly, there is a loss of motivation. They are not even able to be motivated to do things that they otherwise enjoy doing. There could be lack of concentration. The thoughts are only negative. It's very difficult to have a positive frame of mind. There's a general sense of lethargy where the person doesn't feel like doing anything. The drive is lost. There's a sense of, you can see that the person has become mentally and physically very sluggish. And if depression becomes extreme, there are suicidal thoughts. Having said that, I must say that depression and anxiety, both of these are very treatable problems. They are not conditions that one has to go through for life. Medical management as well as non-medical management, India and everywhere in the world for depression is very well advanced. And it can be easily treated with a correct form of treatment. And we have so many people who come to us with depression, and a few months' time, they are completely treated. So if ever somebody has depression, one has to understand that you're suffering from a problem that from our perspective, from the clinical side, is like a common cold. Everybody gets treated almost. So it's seek treatment and you can easily get out of it. Thank you.
Sunita ji, I would like to ask in this, you said it's absolutely possible for them to be treated. So would you say that it is the medicines that work or some counseling that works, and can they actually get treated without any medications?
Now, when I say, it's not absolutely possible, because in every disorder, there is a certain percentage of people who do not respond to treatment. But in this depression, most people respond to treatment. It's very easily treated that way. When we diagnose a clinical depression, major depressive disorder as we call it, medical management becomes very important. It's very difficult to treat the patient without medical management, because there are other neurotransmitters involved which need to be medically intervened and treated. Only therapy or counseling will not work, and it can do harm, because in therapy you can tell the patient, you will be telling the patient to think positively, whereas the person, because of his symptoms being negative thoughts, is incapable of thinking positively. So the person gets frustrated. So initially the line of treatment, first line of intervention is medical, where you make the patient asymptomatic, and parallelly psychotherapy, or what we call as counseling, will help. So counseling helps in changing their attitude and looking at all those psychological, non-biological factors which could have contributed towards the cause of the depression. So that by the time the medication stops, we are also able to stop all the non-medical factors which later on bring up relapse. And it is very possible. There are many forms of treatment non-medically that helps the patient to, we can ensure that the person does not relapse again. Both are necessary, medical and non-medical.
Thank you so much. I'll have Devesh to ask the next question to Swamiji.
Thank you, Chitraji. So, Swamiji, the next question is again more focusing on the youth. But as you had spoken about the difference between standard of living and standard of life, how do you sort of get youth to realize the importance of sort of anchoring within? Because I can say from personal experience, a lot of people my age, we're always focused on external achievements. We have to hit this next goal and this next goal and this next goal. And we focus on the external, and then when we're 60, 70, we realized, wait a second, we never focused on the internal, you know? So maybe how do you sort of try to at least anchor within, especially when you're at a young age?
A very simple fact of life is this: the higher the goal I have, the greater is the effort required for it. Greater is the mental strength also required for it. Very simple fact this is. So as you said, youth have ambition, youth have goals, and we want to achieve great things. We want to be, you know, in a global world we are living, and the targets are also very high, goals are high. So that itself is a need that to achieve that goal, I must learn to anchor myself well. So today, one very important mindset change has to happen is we should not think that spirituality is a post-retirement plan, number one. Number two, we should not think spirituality is optional. Just like I have my vitamins and minerals and my food and my exercise and my sleep, like what they say for the physical health, they say that now. Food, exercise, sleep, rest is all very, very important. Otherwise, one will be, you know, collapse, body will collapse fast. Same way, we need to have a spiritual anchoring within. Having said these two aspects, that spirituality is not to be postponed. It is not a post-retirement plan. It is need of the hour for my success. It is not that, you know, spirituality takes me away from success. Our Upanishads are very clear. Bhutyai na pramaditavyam, kushalat na pramaditavyam. Don't postpone your success. Don't postpone your prosperity. In fact, this is the convocation address of a student who is going out of the Gurukul. You know, like how nowadays they have some celebrity to come and give a convocation address in some, you know, Harvard convocation address or a, Stanford convocation address or an IIM convocation address. The Rishi there is giving a convocation address to the students. And he's saying, don't postpone this. But he's also saying at the same time, Swadhyaya pravachanabhyam na pramaditavhyam. Don't postpone your spiritual study and your sharing and your spiritual anchoring. So this first fact has to be understood very clearly, that this is not an optional thing. This is a need of the hour. For me at this stage of my life, in fact, that's why the first stage of our life in our Hindu culture is Brahmacharya ashram, where I get anchored in knowledge. Then you get into Grahastha ashram, so that my Grahastha ashram becomes most productive and happy and harmonious. So whether it is for my job or relationships, I need this knowledge. That is one aspect. Now, how to anchor within? First and foremost is I should find out what I truly love, which is what we call in our scriptures as Swadharma. The choice of a career is only one aspect of Swadharma. Swadharma means, who am I as a person? What are my values? What I really cherish? What are the things that don't go well with me? What are the things I will not compromise? What kind of things make me, they repel me. So I should be very aware, what they call nowadays as self-awareness. I should become more and more aware of myself, my likes, my dislikes, what I truly love, what is my basic temperament. Then that will reflect in my profession, in my relationships, in my personal life, in everything that I'm doing. So if I anchor in my Swadharma, what they say nowadays, do what you love and love what you do, that will provide a lot of satisfaction also. One will not be frustrated. In the Gita, the beautiful line, Paradharmo bhayavaha. Today, a lot of stress and mental health issues also rise up because I am not able to find out what I am made for, and I am doing something else, and the frustration level is high. I can't handle it. Then I go into sadness. So one aspect of anchoring is to find out who am I. That is at the heart level. At the head level, purpose must be clear to me. What is my purpose? Why am I doing this? And what difference does this make? The greater is the purpose, deeper is the satisfaction. So if I know that my work makes a difference to the people or to the community or to the nature, whatever it may be, there is a sense of worthiness, there is a sense of purpose that I am carrying with me. Which nowadays in management, they say that have a purpose that is larger than yourself. So it is not thinking about I, me and mine only, that how much did I progress, how much did I earn, how much did I achieve. It is what are you accomplishing for the larger good. That gives a healthy sense of purpose. So intellectually, I am anchored in a deeper sense of purpose. Emotionally, I am anchored in what am I really made for. And externally, I should shift from the attitude of asking and wanting more and more to giving and serving. The more I'm into the attitude of service and giving, I will be in a proactive mode. Because in receiving, there's nothing wrong in receiving. I'm not saying don't receive anything. I'm just saying the shift, the major shift is we all keep waiting. People will love me, people will praise me, people will do this to me, that to me. And sometimes it doesn't come to our expectations, so then we feel frustrated. If I become active in giving and find the joy in giving, that also is another way to anchor in oneself. And lastly, very important is, see, all these changes, they come because our mind itself is volatile. That mind needs to anchor in something which is permanent. And what is that which is permanent? That is the reality or truth or God or self, whatever we call it. What is that which is changeless? Can I spend time, at least 5-10 minutes in a day, to try and anchor my mind in that state through some spiritual practice? It can be meditation, it can be breath control, it can be japa, it can be bhajan, anything, where my mind becomes completely still. That still mind is a powerhouse of energy. So when I understand these aspects as a youngster and I start early, it becomes more easier to train my mind. So that's how one can anchor within, and a youth can be convinced also. And you see so many achievers, that's another way to show how many great achievers have followed so many of these things. When the youth have those examples, then they understand, oh, this is how I can apply.
From a psychological perspective, when we talk about anchoring within, the way we understand the term anchoring within from our perspective is the ability to look within myself for solutions when I have a psychological problem, where I have resources within myself to solve and to manage my emotional problems. Now, this management, this having, looking for resources inside and using your internal resources to cope with a problem, this starts right from childhood. The way we look at it is that skills like emotional well-being, resilience, compassion, emotional quotient, patience, all of these are skills that can be taught and trained. There is a huge myth in the society in general, especially among parents, that children have to be temperamentally born with these virtues. Not necessary. There are some children who don't have these virtues. Instead, there are many of us who don't have them. And they can be trained. Instead, there is a lot of research that has gone on even to prove that emotional well-being is something that can be trained. And that is what Vedanta trains us anyway. It sees it as a skill and it gives us steps to train. So if parents start training their children for these skills right from a very young age, so when they grow up, when they have problems, they will not look for external sources of resources and external tools to help themselves and external ways to help themselves. They will look within, and they will also have the bandwidth and the ability to contain these emotional problems. There are therefore nowadays mental health programs in schools have become very important. In Chinmaya Mission, we have Shishu Vihar, Bal Vihar. I cannot tell you how important these things are, because these programs actually teach the child emotional and mental well-being right from a very young age. Parents also have to understand that to be able for them to teach the child these skills, they have to first have very high frustration tolerance and patience. You will typically see when you're dealing with children and parents that a parent wants the child to change. And for some reason, they believe that the child can change independent of them. They don't have to be a part of that change at all. So they completely remove themselves out of the equation and they will say, my child has to change. And they don't succeed because we learn more from what we see than what we hear. As we see, in English, there is a saying, what I see is so loud that I can barely hear what you are saying. So it is very important for parents to be able to change themselves. If I want to teach my child how to tolerate frustration, how will I know what to teach unless I myself am able to tolerate frustration? I have to look within myself and ask, what am I doing when I'm getting frustrated? Then out of that answer, I can teach my child. So this is a two-way street. It's a program for children as well as adults. Thank you.
Sunita ji, there's something that I wanted to, as you were saying, and as Swamiji was saying, that first 25 years, we have to establish ourselves with the knowledge. Now, my question here is that when we were in school, the way we were brought up, that the teacher would actually beat or shout, or even the rote learning, which we are actually saying, no, don't do it. That time, I don't remember of any of my friends saying that I'm very depressed or I'm very stressed. Right now, as you're saying, even parents have to, understand that they have to change and the children have to see what the parents are saying. The issue over here is nowadays, if a teacher is even trying to correct the child, the parents are going about and saying, look, don't blame my child. In spite of so much of protection, in spite of so much of cushioning, the child is more stressed. So how does it work? Isn't it better that at that time, that 25 years where we are supposed to be established, we needed somebody to be a little more strict with us. And I think it worked in our generation. So how do we, look at that where we are looking at teaching and even parenting?
First of all, not all parents cushion their children. Instead, there are parents who go to the other extreme and can be very difficult with their children. And I'm not a child psychologist, but from my experience, what I have seen is that parents, if they have to correct their children, and if they realize that what their child is doing in the long term is going to have a negative consequences in their life, they generally don't mind taking whatever corrective actions that need to get taken. They only become defensive if they begin to think that their child is being, reprimanded for no reasons. Having said that, yes, I do know some children, some parents who are totally on a trip of denial, and they are not ready to see anything wrong that their child is doing. This is largely
Absolutely.
because what we have observed, what I have also observed is, the minute you tell a parent that there is something wrong with their child, they feel extremely guilty. And because they cannot handle their guilt, they somehow want to say that their kid is normal. So the parent himself or herself needs a lot of counseling and compassionate hearing to help them know that they don't have to feel guilty. Not everything is because it's their fault. And the minute the parent realizes that it can be undone, and they can, that whatever the process is, it can be undone, their parenting can become better, then they slowly turn around and they're ready to take help, see that there is a problem. So the parents also need very careful handling because they are operating out of high guilt and a huge sense of internal locus of control and responsibility. That is one. And children today, yes, unfortunately, the schools, they believe that you are not supposed to be strict with the child, you're not supposed to punish the child. Punishing never works. Punishing anyway, historically, has never worked. Only consequences work. Punishing is gambling. See, also now the new, see, if tomorrow I refuse to stop watching TV, or if I don't do my homework and my mother says you cannot watch TV, there is no connection between not doing homework and not watching TV. Today she will say you didn't do homework, I will not let you watch TV. Tomorrow she will say, oh, you didn't do homework, I will not let you go to play. But suppose she says you don't do homework, and the teacher shouts at you and you just get fired, I will not support you. That is the consequences of not doing homework. So punishment anyway doesn't work. In our times, it was very different. We didn't have a vocabulary of depression. You know, words
we didn't know.
the word makes a very big difference. When I know a word like stress, when I know a word like depression, then I start feeling those emotions. There are certain communities, certain cultures in the world that don't have a word for sadness. They don't have a word for hatred. And therefore, they don't know what these emotions feel. They must be feeling it, but because they don't have a word, it is not such a big issue with them. When we were young, when we were small, depression was only seen in clinics. It was not a part of daily language. Stress was not a part of daily language. So the vocabulary that is used also makes a very big difference. So I guess all of that, plus the awareness of the media, plus what the parents speak at home, plus the parents' insecurity. We have to understand that today parents are operating out of fear. When the media keeps telling that so many people have killed themselves, harmed themselves, they are scared. Actually, the level of suicide rate is not as high as we think it is. There is some amount of increase, but not such a significant increase. It is only because the media is talking about it and the awareness is more, and parents' antennas are very high to such news that it is on the forefront. So I guess all of these factors put together is what we are seeing together. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunita ji. Devesh, I think you take the next question on karma with
Sure.
Swamiji.
Sure, definitely. First of all, Swamiji and Sunita ji, thank you so much for the way you both broke it down. Swamiji, when you started off, when you said spirituality is not a post-retirement plan, that was beautifully said. And also speaking about how we need to find a Swadharma. And the greater the purpose, the deeper the satisfaction. And then Sunita ji, when you brought it back to how children need to be trained and they're not just born with it, and also the importance of Bhavya that you spoke about as well. That was beautiful. So thank you so much. Swamiji, sort of the next question is that, like a lot of the youth today, at least, the idea of karma or maybe life after death doesn't really exist for them. So they think that everything starts and ends with this life itself, and there's nothing before, there's nothing after. So maybe how does one explain to someone like this or a young person like this that the idea of karma or sort of life after death?
So there are 2-3 aspects here to understand. What appeals to the youth, we have to also take that into consideration. So first principle is cause and effect is very logical, rational, because youth are looking for logical, rational answers. And cause and effect is a principle that we see applying everywhere. So if the seed is the cause, the plant is the effect. One can't say that plant just came out of nothing. It came from a cause, which is the seed. Same way, you also came from a cause. You didn't pop out just because of a biological process of conception. That is just the physical body. You know, the body, we can say, if you take the example of let us say a phone is only an instrument. There has to be a SIM card inside it and a connection with the subscription of a telecom service. Otherwise, it is just an instrument. It can't do anything on its own. And it's a useless thing for me. But there is something else which is there in it, which is what makes this combination happen. So what is that which makes this inner thing manifest and function, which when it is not there, this is not functioning anymore. That means there is something which is beyond the body. Because see, this view of life that there is no karma, they don't believe in karma, is a view which has existed for thousands of years. That in the philosophy we call as Charuvak philosophy. It is, Charu means sweet and Vak means speech. So Charuvak means sweet speech. And the sweet speakers, what they will say, there is only one life. The objective of life is eat, drink and enjoy. Take debt, drink ghee. Rinam kritva ghritam pibet. Meaning just don't bother, because why are you even bothered about repaying of the debt? There is no next life. So why bother about morality, consequences of action and karma? None of that matters. Because for them, the body is the ultimate reality, which is the material outlook which persists even today. And even to a certain extent, some people do believe that, brain produces consciousness, brain produces mind. You see? Whereas psychology and the other fields and spirituality are very clear that mind functions through the brain. Mind is independent of the brain. It can exist independently also. So the idea is to understand that there is something else which enlivens this, and it is not just matter. So one can even use certain scientific conclusions of certain scientists. I'm just going to share one or two of them, because those things, when they read, then at least it sets them thinking that, oh, there is something higher than this. What I think is only body, there is something greater than this. So now here you will just see some quotations of certain scientists which can help a person to understand. And these are some of the scientists whom one has even read about. Like we have studied in school, the Niels Bohr's atom model of atom. So the Niels Bohr, what does he say? Everything we call real is made of things that cannot be regarded as real. If quantum mechanics has not profoundly shocked you, you haven't understood it yet. That means that whatever I think is real, this world and this body, is founded on something which is much deeper. You cannot just say everything is just what I see. Same way, David Bohm, he said something very nice that, a very beautiful quote actually this is, where he says that we are connected. We are not only connected to one another as human beings, we are also connected as mind, energy and matter to one another and to all living organisms. this interconnectedness leads directly to the idea that there is a consciousness or intelligence that underlies all that is visible. And it is this consciousness that gives us humans the power beyond imagination. Such powerful lines these are, that we have as humans power beyond imagination, not because of this physical body, because there is a consciousness, because there is a mind, and because there is a law of cause and effect. So like this, there are many scientists also who have said quite a few things, that when we understand those aspects, then we start inquiring, okay, there is something deeper to life. Then there are certain other aspects also which one should understand, that why do we say, see, karma literally means cause and effect, which even from Newton's laws, laws of action that Newton spoke about. What is the third law of action? Every action will have an equal and opposite reaction. So if I have done some action, it will have a response, it will have a reaction. If I say that no, I am doing some action in this life, its results will not come when some body drops. Now that is contradicting science also. Today's action will give a result either immediately or tomorrow. Same way you extend this logic to the past. Yesterday's action creates today's destiny. So there has to be karma, there has to be continuity. Now this is only logic. What is the experiential proof of this? That there is karma and that there is a life before and after death. What is the experiential proof of this? There are lots of experiential proofs. One experiential proof is called xenoglossia. Xenoglossia is a phenomenon where a child who has never been exposed to that language will speak that language, and very fluently. Very small child. From where did the child learn that? It is not even the impressions that the child has heard or somebody has taught. From where is the child carrying that impression? Xenoglossia is one phenomenon. Second phenomenon is what we call NDE, near death experience. See, I am giving all the scientific answers and vocabulary just to make people understand. Otherwise, Vedanta is very, very clear on it, that why logic of cause and effect works and karma happens. There is no question that karma is not there. So what is NDE? Dr. Raymond Moody, he did the research on people who have been declared clinically dead, who have been put in morgue, but they have made a comeback. And the descriptions of those people, and he did a vast study of people from different cultures, backgrounds, many of them being non-believers, atheists and all that. And a lot of them said so many things, that I was above the body, I could see the body clearly. I passed through a tunnel, there was light at the end of the tunnel. I felt my whole life going through in front of me. And in the presence of that light, I felt completely loved and accepted. So many descriptions are there of all that. These are experiences of people. Experiences of one or two people you can negate. You cannot negate the experiences of thousands of people. So that is NDE, then xenoglossia. Then you have child prodigies. People like Mozart. How was he able to compose these symphonies and all that? Such young children, they exhibit such fantastic, unimaginable levels of talent. How is that possible? Because there is some Purva Janma Samskar is what we say in Vedanta, that life is carrying forward. Past life regression is one, but I'm not going into that because there are certain probably controversies on that also, and people feel that it could be imaginations and all that. So these are a few aspects, and one very interesting scientist is called, his name is Dr. Ian Stevenson. What he did, now he is no more, but he was a former professor of psychiatry at the University of Virginia School of Medicine and former chair of the Department of Psychiatry and Neurology. He dedicated a majority of his career to finding evidence of reincarnation until his death in 2007. And he claims to have found over 3,000 examples of reincarnation during his time, which he shared with the scientific community. Dr. Ian Stevenson has done a lot of research on that. So my objective is simple. If the youth are taught in this way that, these are the reasons, And across cultures, people have believed. It is not about just Hinduism. Christianity also said that. Jesus himself said John the Baptist was Elijah. Buddhism believes in reincarnation. Rumi said, I died out of a stone, became a plant. I died out of a plant, became an animal. I died out of an animal, became a human. Why should I die? Why should I be scared of death? I will die and become divine. You know, Origen said about it. Then various German scientists also have spoken about it. Many people have spoken across the cultures. So Hinduism, Buddhism, all of them also believe in that. Eastern traditions believe. Many Western also believe. So we need to look at it in a holistic perspective. And very important in this is one simple fact. Think for yourself. Using all this, think for yourself. Because today we find the youth carried away very easily by propaganda. What is the belief of the majority? What is fashionable? They want to accept that and go along with it. One is not thinking for oneself. If one starts thinking for oneself, one will find that this is a common sense conclusion. Looking at life around, the variety of life itself which is there is not a product of chance. There is some reasoning behind it. So a lot of these factors are there. One needs to put all those things together and understand, then youth will be able to at least start their inquiry.
Swami, just to continue with this thought that what actually happens to the soul after they commit suicide? From the Vedantic standpoint, I'm sure Dr. Sunita would not have these conversations with her patients when they talk about, what happens to the Atma or the soul. But Swamiji, if you could put some light on this from the Vedantic standpoint.
See, first we have to understand what happens to the Jivatma when one drops the body in a normal condition. Suicide comes next. For that, we have to know what we just discussed, that body is just outer casing. There is a individuality which is comprised of the mind, intellect, memory, ego, senses, which we call as the subtle body. So in Vedanta, we say the 5 senses of knowledge, 5 senses of action. Seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, touching are not senses of knowledge. Moving, grasping, speaking, evacuating, reproducing, senses of action. 5 pranas, the physiological systems in the body. Inhale, exhale, digestion, circulation, assimilation. Then mind, seat of emotions, intellect, seat of thoughts and decisions. Memory is our functional and psychological memory, and ego, the sense of I. This is called our subtle body. These are 19 items, plus our impressions and the fact that I don't know who am I truly, that is called ignorance. These 21 items, they eject from the gross body and move ahead. As per their karma, they are guided to take up another form at the appropriate time. So the example given in the Gita is like changing of the clothes. Old clothes are dropped, new clothes are taken up. Now this can happen to any person of any age. It need not be only for old people. At any time when one is dropping the body, this is what happens. Death is actually disassociation of the subtle body, causal body from the gross body. And that person doesn't directly get into higher states. That person is in the interspace, what we call as Bhuvar Loka, which is what we call as the departed individuality, which we call as Preta Sharira. It's like a transit lounge. Between 2 flights, you have a transit lounge. So it's a transit lounge where one is in a transit phase, where one is to come to terms with what has happened. And if one has come to terms with what has happened, then one moves ahead from there faster. So the individuality is out of the physical body. And it is depending on its own attachments, that it hovers around the physical body and the people around, and all the emotions of all the people it can feel, it can go through, it can understand much more powerfully than when it was in the physical body. So it has to learn to accept this reality. The mantras which are chanted after the body drops, those mantras, those shlokas, those rituals, they help this individuality to accept the new state of existence and also guide this individuality to a higher level. This is a normal process. Then accordingly that individual gets its own karma phala, goes to higher or lower states of consciousness and continues its journey of karma. Now what happens in the case of suicide? From Vedantic perspective, first of all, suicide is an act where from Vedantic standpoint it is said that one is trying to escape the karma. One is not trying to face karma. Because one has difficulties, one has challenges, one is not wanting to face them, or one has got tired facing them, one wants to drop. Which from Vedanta standpoint is not appropriate because that karma will not get exhausted. So I have abruptly ended a life where I was supposed to complete certain karma. Now I didn't complete. I have given up a precious human opportunity. So it is this denying myself. The biggest sufferer of suicide is that individual. And if people think that suicide is an end of problems, suicide is the beginning of new problems. Please understand from Vedantic standpoint, it is a beginning of new problems because in the journey of evolution, I was supposed to go in a certain direction. Now I have committed a suicide. Now the result of that suicide will be that I have squandered a fantastic opportunity. My existing karma has got stopped. And because this action of suicide is a prohibited action, it is not to be done, it has its own consequences. So that jiva goes through a lot of time and various lower births and various levels of suffering before it comes back to face those same karmas and continue the journey again. This is Vedantic perspective, which is very clear that any suicide when it is done, it is a detour from the natural progression of evolution, and it's a very heavy price that the jiva pays. And hence it is that suicide is not advised. It is condemned in the scriptures, and it is actually called as an act of cowardice. It is not an act of heroism, though it may require a lot of planning and courage to do that in the world outside here. But from spiritual standpoint and the mindset standpoint, it is an act of cowardice because I don't want to face my problems. And life is meant to overcome these problems so that I become stronger. Now I don't want to do that. I want to escape from it. So then suicide is not the solution actually, because I cannot escape from my karma. And hence that jiva goes through a lot of suffering. And those descriptions are given in the scriptures. One wants to read it, one can go and read it. Now, one very important question that people raise here is, what about those who voluntarily give up their body? Which is not a suicide. See, there are great Mahatmas, there are great yogis, and there are great other people who voluntarily give up their body, not because of frustration. They have very high levels of vairagya, and their mind is absorbed in the self, and they have completed the karmic aspect, and they do not do it as an act of escapism. They do it out of the fulfillment that whatever had to be achieved is achieved now. There's nothing more that needs to be achieved. With full gratitude, with full surrender to the Supreme, they let go of the body. They are not hurting, harming themselves. That's a very big difference. That one should know, because some people who read scriptures may bring up this point. So this is what is the perspective of scriptures on this topic. What happens to the jiva after this jiva commits suicide?
Okay, thank you, Swamiji. Devesh, you can go with the next question. I think we are running out of time. We would want people, there are some messages that I'm getting. People have some questions.
We can take one more question probably and then open up for Q&A.
Yes. Yes, Devesh, you can go ahead.
Sure. So sort of all actions are committed with either a revulsion to sorrow or yearning for joy, as Swami Chidananda had mentioned in the book Self-Unfoldment, which is an amazing book for someone that isn't very well versed with Vedanta. As someone, for me personally, a lot of youngsters, it's really helped us out. So maybe like, how do you reach that permanent state of joy or bliss when you're constantly fluctuating up and down as a whole?
So the word you used is permanent state of bliss. So naturally, first thing to understand here is that what is permanent is not available in the world outside, which is changing. I have to dwell within to discover what is that changeless aspect within me. And that is what we call as self. The word that Gurudev's book you used is self-unfoldment. So self-unfoldment is the unfoldment of the individual to actually realize who am I, the true self. So how do I get to that state? 5 simple points. First point is satsang. Satsang means good company, and satsang means company of right thoughts. This applies not only in spiritual life, even in other aspects of life. Company plays a very, very big role. I must ensure that my company is inspiring, positive, and noble, because that will affect my mind a lot. So satsang is the first step in spirituality. Then comes svadhyaya. I must study regularly, reflect and think clearly. Then comes sadhana. I should spend some time in doing certain spiritual practices whereby I learn to quieten my mind, make it single pointed, make it sharp. Fourth comes is sanyam. Certain things I will have to live in self-control. Things which are harmful for me, I must firmly deny them. Maybe I have tested it a little bit here and there, but I have to stop it. If I am serious about my evolution, I have to do it. Like what is common in the youth many times is the drinking and alcohol and all that, and smoking. Those are not cool at all. They are very, very harmful addictions at the body level, mind level. They destroy our potential. So those need to be stopped. One cannot say I will do this also and this also. Then spiritual evolution will get, it's like putting the accelerator and brake at the same time. One won't progress fast. So sanyam is the fourth one, and last one is seva. One must be selfless to serve and channelize one's energies, physical energies in a productive way, in a selfless way. If these 5 we are able to do, our mind becomes strong. We can face challenges of life. At the same time, we are anchored within, and we are able to learn what is that true self and abide in that and experience that permanent state of happiness. All right, so we have exceeded by 8 minutes. The session formally will concludes here in the sense of our interaction. And thank you very much to all of you. If questions are there, then yes, please raise your hand. There will be a hand button which you may have there. So raise your hand, and one by one we can answer for some more time, and we will unmute each person and then you can ask the question.
I've just got a message with one question. Probably Sunita ji, this question is for you. Some people cannot handle the situations around, or they are not able to fight situations, so they easily accept that they have mentally given up and they are depressed. They start behaving as if they are sick and they need attention. How do we handle such people?
You have to unmute, Sunita.
First, we have to clearly find out whether the person is depressed or not. And if with the help of an expert, once that diagnosis is ruled out, that the person is not depressed, then there are many non-medical methods in psychotherapy which can help the person understand why he or she is thinking like that, what are the belief systems which are causing this kind of an attitude. And accordingly, it can be treated, the person can be helped now non-medically through counseling, where the person doesn't have to feel that he is helpless or their life is hopeless. So if depression, then a medical and non-medical management. If no depression, only non-medical management. Both can be done.
Okay, so Vineet Mittal has asked us
Yes, Swamiji.
to raise his hand, so you can unmute and please ask.
What are the stages?
Okay, please ask clearly. I'm not able to hear.
What are the stages in Hindi?
Sorry, that's my son. He's 6 years old. He's asking, what are the 4 stages in one's life, as we say, grahastha, bal, the 4 stages.
Yeah, so
And
the,
you want to understand the role at each of these stages.
so the first stage is called Brahmacharya Ashram, where one is a student, one learns about how to live life, how to find out one's Swadharma, what are the various skills, one gains the knowledge. So how we go to school, that stage is called Brahmacharya Ashram, where one gains knowledge. Earlier the knowledge was combined, spiritual knowledge and the knowledge of the skills. So it was a holistic knowledge that a person got. Having got the knowledge, then the next stage is Grahastha, where you enter into a family life and you serve the society, you serve your family, achieve success, prosperity, wealth, name, fame, all these, but following righteous values, keeping the goals in mind very clearly without compromising. And in that stage also continue to anchor the mind through devotional practices. Then one comes to the third stage, which is called Vanaprastha Samsthan, where one slowly starts withdrawing from active worldly life and trains the next generation, the children who have grown up, to take over or to handle certain aspects of the family or a business life or a professional life, whatever it may be. And one spends more time in doing spiritual pursuits. And last stage is called sannyas, where one renounces formally the body identification and one exclusively thinks of God and tries to understand the oneness with the Supreme. So these are the 4 stages of life, and traditionally it is said 25 years for each. So that is 100 years is a fulfilled life where you have seen everything in life, and at the right time you start withdrawing and then you give up those things to realize the Supreme. So as a memory aid, if you want to remember, there are 4 words: learn, burn, U-turn, no return. Simple. First 25 years learn, next 25 years earn and burn, next 25 years U-turn, slowly turn towards the self within, and last 25 years no return, meaning realize oneness with the Lord and live a blissful life. Aparna Bhuta.
Hello, Hari Om Swamiji. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to ask the person who is having this problem of anxiety or depression, that person is definitely not aware of that. So the people who are aware, if they are, if you happen to say that to person, it's like an insult. So that person has to approach any clinical help or something. How do you prepare that person? Okay, you need a help, or how do you seek that help from that person? Like, how do you convince that person that you need a help? Like, how do you approach a clinical person?
Nita, you have to answer.
People who are depressed and anxious, they are very well aware that they are depressed and anxious. It is something that they are very keen to get rid of. So they do most often on their own approach people from the clinical field, and they are more often than not ready for any kind of help that's given to them. The only time when we find some resistance is when we try to introduce medical management. That is also because of the large myth that people have about psychotropic medication. But with the depression and anxiety, generally we don't face the problem of people not being aware of their problem or not wanting to take help, because it is a problem where they are very keen to take help. So many people on their own approach, they are not forced by their relatives. There can be some cases that's largely because of a lot of fear of social stigma and what we also call as self stigma. They think of themselves as weak if they are depressed or anxious, where they need to be told that it is a medical disorder like any other physical problem, and it can happen to the strongest of people. So just because somebody has been diagnosed with a depressive disorder or an anxiety disorder, that doesn't mean they are mentally or psychologically weak. That's not true. It's a disorder. It's a medical condition that can be treated, and that does not indicate towards any kind of psychological weakness. Generally, if they are explained in that way, most people are ready for help. That's what we have seen with depression and anxiety.
What happens is in Vedanta, we give this very simple example. Just adding to what Sunita said, is if you have a toothache, do you have any stigma? You don't have. Now you just go to a dentist and get yourself treated, and nobody looks down upon that person. That person will not look down upon oneself. Same way, if you have a certain mental condition, so we call these as the vikar, they are modifications of the mind. Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mada, Matsarya, they are modifications of the mind. If we are going through any of these, we need to seek help. If we are not able to handle it by ourselves, seek a help and come out of it. As simple as that. One should not feel I am low because of it or I am bad because of this. I just have a issue, I need to handle it. So treat it as an issue-based thing and take the steps to come out of it. So explain it in that way to the person and hopefully it can help. Shriram Nair.
Hari Om Swamiji. I had two doubts. The first one is that people say that there are 7 lives and some people say that there are infinite lives and like that. So it means, and I heard from someone that when Brahma closes his eyes for a sleep, then everything is destroyed. So which of them is correct?
See, the 7 life concept is cooked up by some people. It is not given in the scriptures. It is very simple. What they say, as per your karma, you will get as many lives as you need to go through your own results. Because you have done the action the result has to be faced by you. How many ever life it takes, you will take. Why 7 lives? There is nothing called 7 lives in the scripture. That people have cooked up on their own.
Oh. And the second doubt is,
I will finish.
Some people say that if we do bad things in life, then we go to Patal Loka, and if we do good things in life, we go to heaven. And so, does this really happen that we go to the heaven and all?
First, you have to mute yourself because otherwise I keep hearing your background. Okay.
Okay.
Now, if you do any bad action here, while living here, suppose you cheat somebody or you kill somebody or you rob somebody, will you go to jail or not? Action has a consequence, no? And if you do some great work, you will be rewarded or not? It's as simple as that. Good gets good, bad gets bad. That is law. As simple as that. Nobody can escape. So if one has done certain actions which are negative, which are harming us and harming others, the result will be there. And one will go to the appropriate realms of consciousness. Patal Lok is the realm of consciousness, like how our dream is a realm. It's not a physical place. No, it's a realm of consciousness. Like that, there is a realm of consciousness where the individual goes according to the good karmas, goes up, according to bad karmas, goes down. Those things are real. They are not cooked up by people just to make them follow morality. That modern people who want to say that, let them say, because they don't have a proper clarity and understanding. But when you go by law of karma, it is a fact that there are states of consciousness which are higher and lower. and according to the results of the action, people will go. Brahmaji, when he closes his eyes, yes, everything gets dissolved. Just like when you go to sleep, what happens? Your whole world is inside you, no? And when you open your eyes and you wake up, then again you remember everything. Same way it happens. Brahmaji sleeps, world becomes unmanifest. Brahmaji gets up, again the jivas will start. Again creation starts. As simple as that. I'm really surprised that small kids are sitting and listening to these things.
Actually, we had put a rider for 13 and above. It is suggested that parents do not bring in children below the age of 13. It's not healthy.
Bhairavi Khanna.
Pranam Swamiji.
Haji.
I have a question where suppose if somebody has committed suicide, how would you give strength, or what would you say to the parents of that who have lost their child to move on or to accept the death from a Vedantic point of view and also from a psychological or a therapeutic point of view?
See, from Vedantic standpoint, first and foremost thing is to ensure that the parent is comforted and consoled. One should not scare them at all. Whatever the individual has done, whatever may be the consequence of it, that the individual will deal with it. Do not tell the parents about those consequences and try to scare them. Assure them that okay, he or she has done it. As a parent, your bond with the child is still there because our subtle bodies are connected. And even as I said, the body, the individuality is still around the body. And in this realm called Bhuvar Loka, which is just a little above Bhuloka, is called Bhuvar Loka. So the individual is still there and the individual can feel what you are going through. And the scriptures are very clear that when you do the mantras, when you do the rituals, if you do with a attitude of gratitude that that person had enriched my life, I am grateful for that, all the experiences I had. I wish well for that person in the journey ahead. And as a parent, when they wish, it is a very powerful thing. It will influence the jiva very strongly. So though they have sorrow, this is one way of positively empowering the jiva who has dropped the body by sending positive thoughts, by sending loving thoughts, and by doing any of these spiritual mantras and rituals which are prescribed if they believe in it, because they have a big impact. Whether today's science and today's so-called rationalists believe it or not, there are enough evidences to prove how it impacts, and our scriptures have given enough of this. So when the person is being told these things, that you are still connected, especially for the first 16 days, definitely, and then for 1 full year, because our time and their time, there is a big difference. Our 1 year is equal to 1 day in their existence. And that's why the scriptures will always say that on the Tithi day, when they have passed, every single month for first 1 year, you have to do certain rituals which are the Shraddha rituals which are there. And 12 days, it is in their existence. Our 12 months is 12 days in their existence. Those rituals, those mantras, etc., they generate a certain momentum which helps this jiva to go ahead in life and cross over the challenging situations and move ahead in life, which is what the parent can do at this moment. The parent cannot bring back the child, and please tell the parents, if at all they are thinking, don't put it in their head, but if you know that they are thinking of this, do not do any of this calling the spirit and what is that they write, those things. I forget the name. With T it starts, where they become the medium and the child of that jiva is called, and then they
paranomical healing.
No.
What is, I don't know.
Something else it is. So don't do any of that. The jiva is in its own journey. Wish the jiva well. Feel gratitude. Learn to accept that the death has happened. If there are any attachments you have, release the jiva from the attachments, because that will help the jiva to go ahead. Those things when one does, Doesn't mean that one doesn't love. One is doing all this out of love for the jiva only, and the jiva will go ahead. So that is what has to be told to the parents, to strengthen them and basically help them to accept situations. And if there is anything that can be changed so that any other family member doesn't go through, if there are certain things which has pushed the individual to do, take certain actions, and if those things need to be corrected, in time those things also can be told so that it can be prevented, for those situations can be prevented for others. At that time, again, it is more of love and comfort which will help them. Intellectual knowledge and those things can come only after they have come quietened down a bit. So this is a spiritual perspective. Sunita, whatever you want to add, please add.
From the psychological perspective, they have to go through the whole grieving process. So it is very important for those of us who are around them not to rush that process. Each one takes their own time of how long they will feel sad. And each one has their own way of experiencing and expressing that grief. And if we, very often we see that when we are uncomfortable with someone who is sad and we don't know how to manage their sadness, we rush them to feel okay because we are uncomfortable around their sadness. We have to understand that they have their own time, they have their own process, and we have to let them go through that. And especially in when it comes to suicide, parents feel, and the relatives, the primary caregivers feel an immense sense of guilt. There is something called survivor's guilt, and they feel a lot of that. So there are specific kinds of management that is available to help people express and manage their survivor guilt, which is something that we do offer as a part of psychotherapy. Also very important to understand is not just suicide, any kind of death. For the first 2 years, we do not diagnose any depression or anything like that. It's very important. Bereavement period is almost 2 years. So if a loved one dies and one manifests symptoms of depression, it can be something called complex grieving. It doesn't have to be depression. So one should not rush and tell the person, go and see a psychiatrist, go and see a psychologist and get yourself treated, become okay. Of course, if the person has a history of depression, if the person has been treated earlier, then yes, then they are right now vulnerable and they have to go and seek their clinician and ask for help. But otherwise, it's important that we allow the person to grieve and feel sad. There's nothing wrong in that. And we can be just supportive. Let's not say it's okay, because it's not okay.
Nishtha Sheikh.
Hari Om Swamiji.
Hmm.
I am the mother of a teenage daughter who's very sensitive, very sweet, but she is going through a lot of anxiety, peer pressure, depression, sleep disorders. She gets migraines, a lot of anxiety. We are already seeing therapists. She's already on medication. But what can I do from the Vedanta perspective to add positive energy in her, in the house? Like read Hanuman Chalisa, or what should I do?
Spiritual practices, those things can be done. But from Vedantic perspective, I would say that first one has to identify what is the psychological cause, why this person is going through this, and see how to make that person strong enough to face it or to accept it or to deal with it. Because those other things which we do are for this purpose. Whether we do chanting or whether we do any other form of spiritual practice or a havan or anything like that, is only to strengthen the mind to come to terms with what has happened, or certain things which I am not able to accept, that why this has happened to me, or certain things why did not this happen to me. So one has to come to learn to make them face what it is. Like Arjun's situation, Bhagavan did not tell him to just chant some mantra. He diagnosed his cause and then made him understand and gave him the right solutions. So those things are very important to do, even from spiritual perspective. It's not only from a psychiatric perspective. but even from spiritual perspective. That's a very, very important aspect to do. To find out and learn to accept and then strengthen oneself to face it, not to escape from it. Sunita, you want to add something? Please add.
Yes, I think I want to add here something very important that one needs to know is that spiritual practices, especially meditation and studying Vedanta in terms of the Advaita philosophy, is not recommended when the person is having depression or anxiety, because it will worsen the depression and worsen the anxiety or any mental disorder. So when we see patients in our clinic, the first don't is no meditation and no sudden beginning of learning Vedanta, because
Okay.
Vedanta is a very subtle subject and it requires a logically balanced mind to understand it and fully appreciate it. And
Okay.
a person who is having a mental illness or is going through some kind of mental trauma is at that point not in a position to understand what Vedanta has to say, because it's a very powerful and subtle subject. So that one. Two, meditation is an absolute no for somebody who is depressed and anxious. It makes them more depressed and more anxious. Because in depression, the mind and the brain will generate negative thoughts. You are shutting your eyes and you're focusing on your thoughts. You're only going to think negatively. We have seen people break down with meditation when they have a mental illness. Meditation is not to relax the mind. That is a myth that meditation helps you relax the mind. No, if we actually start meditating, the initial phases of meditation are very difficult. You have to face the mind, which is not easy. So any form of meditative or Vedantic practices should be taken up only after the person has become asymptomatic clinically and the psychiatrist or the psychologist has given a green signal. Of course, prayers and other religious practices like bhajans, chanting of mantras, and those are powerful. Praying is a very powerful coping mechanism, and that should be used and can be used at any point, not a problem. But I'm talking about Advaita Vedanta knowledge and meditation. Please stay away from this if you know someone who has a mental illness or you yourself have it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
There are other levels of spirituality, those should be encouraged. That's the very important aspect, which help to strengthen the mind. One is the spiritual practices like chanting, prayers, bhajans, those things. Then there are other inspirational books also, where the lives of great achievers, lives of saints, some other literature which is there, which is positive, thoughts inducing, which is inspiring, that should be help. Those will help.
Thank you, Guruji. Also, as a mother, what more can I do? What does the Veda say? What is the duty of a mother if the child is troubled?
You can help the child. You can find out how to, make the child find out the cause, help the child to deal with it. And mentally, you can send energy to her by your positive thoughts and by your prayers. That's what the Vedantic aspect will be, because as a mother, your mind is more deeply connected to hers. Your emotions are more deeply connected to hers. So you must keep yourself strong, keep yourself positive, and keep them inspired by your presence, by your actions, by your words. Speak positive terminologies, make them feel loved. Those things that you can do, which will help them quite a lot.
This was very heartening what you said last. I think I wanted a confirmation of that. This is what I'm doing. Thank you very much.
Meena Shankar. Now this is the last question.
Hari Om Swamiji. Thank you for answering the last question. In fact, thank you, Sunita ji, also for what you added. I had a similar question, and Swamiji, the last part of your answer really answered my question. I have an additional question. You said that we do Shraddha Karma for the departed souls because there still is a connection for the first year. But we also believe that that soul reincarnates, correct? So then why do we do the Shraddha every year and we say we are feeding them because they are in another body somewhere else? I always grappled with this.
See, there are, like I said, the time period is different. Our 1 year is 1 day for them. That's all.
Mhm.
And reincarnation, even if it happens what we call immediately,
Mhm.
it does not matter, because the Shraddha karma is being done for the jiva to empower the subtle body of the jiva. And wherever the jiva is, the subtle body will get empowered. So it doesn't go for a waste. Presuming that immediate birth happens, which from Vedanta standpoint doesn't happen. There is
So
no
when does it happen,
immediate birth
Swamiji?
possible, because the jiva will go through Bhuvarloka, from there go through the results and go through up and down, whatever has to go through. Or if the karmas are required, even to be born on earth, there is a time period involved, there is a gap involved. It's never immediate. Instant birth hota hi nahi hai, wo, that's all a myth. It takes a little time. And in that time period, the Shraddha karma will help. The 16 days of Shraddha karma help the jiva to get out of Bhuvarlok. If the jiva is still not got out of Bhuvarlok, it will still help. But if the jiva has got out of the Bhuvarlok and gone into the higher realms or lower realms or wherever the jiva has gone, 1 year Shraddha karma helps the jiva to take a new body. Year after year when we do it up to maximum 16 years, and then Pitru Shraddha you conclude at Gaya, Matru Shraddha you conclude at Siddhpur. The objective then is that you have completed your duty of 16 years for empowering their lives wherever they are, because the subtle body consists of these five and one mind. You see, 5 senses of knowledge, 5 pranas, 5 senses of action, and the mind, which you divide into mind, intellect, memory, ego. So these 16 items of the subtle body have to be empowered. So one does it for 16 years and then concludes it. Some people conclude it before also if they are not able to continue it, or for other reasons also. So there is a termination process also which is there. After a certain minimum years, they can conclude. By 16 years time, they can definitely conclude. So that is what the scriptures say.
Swamiji, the line glitched a little bit. You said for the Matru Shraddham, where after 16 years, where can they conclude?
Siddhpur.
Siddhpur. Where is that, Swamiji?
Here in west part of India, I think in Gujarat.
Okay. And
somewhere there.
And so my other question is, if you're doing it for 16 years, and let's say that subtle body has reincarnated, does it still help the subtle body?
It will help. It will help because we all are connected. In Vedanta, what we say, that total gross body is called Virat. All that subtle bodies connected together is called the total mind or Hiranyagarbha. So just like it's like a simple thing in today's world, it's very easy to understand. All of us are connected through internet. Wherever that person may be, you have your the phone number or the email ID. You send, it will reach now. So the jivas, gotra, nakshatra, whatever those things are there, no, that according to that, when you have identified and done the ritual and you are intended it to reach that jiva, that power of intention is enough. It will reach wherever that jiva is, in whichever form the jiva is.
Is that how prayers work too, Swamiji?
That's how prayers also work.
Thank you so much.
Right. All right. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Chitra ji and Devesh, for hosting this, and Sunita for all your wonderful inputs. Very practical and very, very applicable. And let us hope all of us are able to anchor ourselves in the knowledge of spirituality and ensure that we strengthen ourselves. Chinmay Mission, Gurudev set up such a beautiful tradition of Vedant courses and then study classes, Devi classes, Chik classes, Chinmay Setukari, Balvihar, Shishu Vihar, Jnana Yajnas, camps, books, what all he has not done to ensure that our life becomes anchored in spiritual knowledge. So let us make the best of it and live a happy, purposeful and a blissful life. Thank you, everyone. We will pray and formally conclude. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah, Sarve Santu Niramaya, सर्वे भद्राणि
भद्राणि
पश्यन्तु
पश्यन्तु
मा कश्चित्
मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत्।
ॐ असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मा अमृतं गमय। ॐ पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्ति। हरिः ओम् श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः। हरिः ओम्।